a 1 week sermon that's kind of different. It's not really part of a series. We just finished a long series, and we're just trying, got a week here to kind of clear my head of some things I've been thinking. So it doesn't really relate to anything. So if it's your first week, it's a great week to come in, because it doesn't, you're not building on anything. It's just kind of standalone all by itself. And hopefully I can make some sense of it for we're all through. When I was just a couple of years ago, I noticed some floaters in my vision. And at first I didn't think anything about it, just some little dark spots. And I didn't do anything about it for a while. And then they kept getting worse. And I went to the doctor and had him look at it. And the doctor said, "Why'd you wait? Don't you know this will keep getting worse?" And I did not know that. I didn't know that. So a little tip for you, a little PSA here at the very beginning. Go to your eye doctor, kids, because really can be a problem. And by the time I actually got to the doctor, my eyes were in pretty bad shape. And they took me straight to Indianapolis, and they scheduled me for a quick surgery. And afterward, I found out that the surgery they did on me a couple generations ago wasn't even a thing. A couple generations ago, I would have been blind. And my eyes still aren't 100% what they ought to be, but it's just I remember that thought, this could have been it. I could have lost my vision, and I would have survived, because people survive and get along okay in that situation. But you think about what a deal that would be, how many adjustments you'd have to make in your life, and how close I really was to being in that spot. In the Bible, there's a lot of people who are blind. It's a pretty common ailment. Isaac is blind at the end of his life. He can't even tell when his son has goat skins on his arms. Jacob loses his eyesight there at the end of his life. Eli loses his eyesight at the end of his life. In fact, it's such a common thing in the Old Testament. It mentions that Moses had great eyes at the end. Even when Moses was an old man, he had great eyes, and it kind of stood out. Most people didn't when they got to the end of their life. Jesus heals a lot of people who are blind. Several people who are blind. In fact, it's probably the most common miracle that he does. And at some level, I'm assuming it's a common miracle for two reasons. First of all, because it was a common ailment, but then also because it was a metaphor too. I mean, he really did heal people who are blind, but your physical blindness can kind of stand in as a metaphor for a spiritually blind person too. Sometimes in our hearts, we don't see things as they really are, and God has to wake us up and heal us there too. There's one, really, I think it's an interesting story, where Jesus heals a guy. They bring a guy to him. It's in Mark, I think, 7, and he heals him. And it says he spits on the guy and it's a whole routine. And then at the end of the whole thing, he says, "Well, can you see?" And the guy says, "Well, I can see people, but they look like trees walking. I don't see them real good." And so Jesus touches his eyes again, and he was fine. And it's such a weird story compared to all the other healing stories, because it looks like Jesus wasn't on his A game that day. Like he just couldn't quite get it done the first try. Give me a second try. And then he gets a second try, and then he's healed. And you could read it and say, well, that's weird. Won't see it any other time. But again, remember, him healing the blind was often a metaphor for something else going on. And as I started thinking about that, I think it's possible, and we see that with the disciples in that same time period when Jesus is doing that miracle, that it's easy to not really see the whole picture. He's healed you enough that you can see things different, but you're still blind in a lot of weird areas. And that's the thought that kind of started niggling in the back of my head. And really, about the same time that all this was going on with my physical eyes, I started thinking about that spiritual aspect of blindness too, and it just kept building. There's a thing in your head, I almost say it wrong, but matriculating activation system. There's a way, that's what they call it, that your brain naturally, without you telling it to, eliminates all the extra information and really helps you focus on things you're interested in. It's real handy. And where you'll see it pop up the most is if there's something that you really want, like you would like to have a new red pickup truck. It'll just seem like that's all you see on the road. Man, there's red pickup trucks everywhere. I never noticed it before. Because your brain really helps you focus in on those things. When that's what you want, it just seems like everybody has one. And your brain naturally kind of eliminates all the competing information. And when I was thinking about this, like I said a couple of years ago, started thinking about it, it's like I saw examples in the Bible all the time about blindness. and people's eyes and how they couldn't really see right. And it seemed like there's a theme all the way through Scripture. And that would be an interesting sermon series for me to go through. You'd get bored with it before we got done. But it'd be interesting to me because I think there's a thread that goes to the Bible there where he talks about that and uses language about our eyes a lot and how the pride of life and the pride of our eyes and how we can get, and it's all the way through the Bible. There's a thing there. And it just seemed like every time I was reading my Bible, I saw it because I was thinking about it and my brain was eliminating all that other information. And I also ran across this quote by a guy, by an author named Paul David Tripp. Paul David Tripp says, we all of us have a spiritual blindness. We don't, in fact, it's one of the natures of sin, is that you can't see your own sin. You can't see the depth of it. You can't see how often you do it. You can't see, sometimes you can't even see when you do it. You just don't notice it. And he says the most dangerous aspect is that we're blind to our blindness. Now, with my physical eyes, when I started having problems, I was aware of it pretty fast. It didn't take you notice it immediately, and you can't look at anything without noticing it. But spiritually blind, you can have that for a long time and not even know that you have it. You can be blind spiritually and be kind of walking away from God and not even be aware that you're doing it. Because sin hides itself that way. It's like a cancer, but it works very hard. That's one of the key features of sin, is it tries to be mysterious. And when I read that, I knew right off it was true. When I read that thing by Paul David Tripp, oh yeah, that's right. I could tell when I read it, I said, that's something. I hadn't thought about it before. I never heard anybody say it before, but I said, that's right. And then when I saw that and I read that and I started thinking about it, well then, if I really meditated on it a little bit, I could see places where I did it. And again, a lot of times not even aware that I was doing it. I went to, about that time when I was thinking all these things, I went to a wedding, and it was a wedding that my wife Julia, it was more people that she knew than I did, and I'm not really. We sat at a table. They assigned us seats, and I didn't know anybody at our table. And that's not really the best situation for me. Some guys are great at that. That's not really my best situation. Very tempting for me to either make a lot of dad jokes or just look at my water the whole time because I don't know what to say. And so we're kind of caught. And then Julia has to leave because she sees somebody, and the whole room was full of people she knew. So she goes over, and so I'm just sitting alone with all these people. And they seem to know each other, but they didn't know me and I didn't know them. And I start noticing things about them. Like this one guy, he's just like really loud. He's like 2 decibels too loud, and he's just killing the rest of us at the table. And then there's a woman, and she's drinking a lot. And I could see, like she's already been to the bar 2 or 3 times. We've not even got our salads yet, and she's already went up there a couple times. And then there's a couple, and it's an older couple at the table, and he'll start to talk, and she'll correct him. Like he'll say 2 things, and no, that's not how it was at all. And she'll stop him, and then she'll take over. And she just killing this guy. And I'm seeing all that, right? And I'm noticing all of it. And then when Julia got back and we had a moment where we would be heard, I told her all the things I saw. And she's kind of put off because she knows all these people and I don't know them that well. And she says, well, you're being kind of judgmental. And again, I didn't even notice that I was, which of course that's what I was doing, right? But I didn't even notice that I was doing it. It just kind of snuck in there. And in some ways, I was worse than any of them. Well, maybe not worse than the guy who was too loud, but I was worse than a lot of the rest of the others. If you was ranking it, I was worse. And I didn't even know that I was doing it. And that's all I was doing. That's all I was doing, and I didn't even know I was doing it. And you just don't realize, how sin will sneak in there, and then all of a sudden you're kind of going down a bad path, and you don't know it. That's the most dangerous part, is that you're blind and you don't know you're blind. And so I got to reading through the scriptures, and I kept finding different people that illustrated this, and it made sense to me. And then I ran across Samson, the story about Samson. Now, I should apologize when I get into this thing from the very beginning that I can't say his name correctly. I say Samson with a P in the middle of it, and there is no P in the middle of it. And I blame my Paoli upbringing. But I can't do it. So I encourage first service with the people beside you there, look at them and try to say Samson and see if you say a P in there too. Just tell it Samson. Any bad any peas in there? No, no. It's Southern Indiana. It really isn't your fault. It's just where we grew up. It's just one of those things. Just forgive me for that. If you've got better dictation, you better diction than I've got. Forgive me for that. But I'm going to say it wrong the whole time. But Samson was an interesting character for this vision thing. I'm not going to do the long story. It says Judges 13, 14, 15, and 16. Judges 13, 14, 15, and 16. The long story. And it's worth your time if you have time to read it this afternoon. But I'm not going to go through each part. I'm just going to tell you the story. Before he was born, Samson, came along, an angel appears to his mother and says, I'm going to give you a son, and he's going to free the Israelites. Because the Israelites had been enslaved to the Philistines for 40 years. And that's a long time. And normally when the Israelites would get bothered by somebody like that, they would cry out to God for help. But it seems like they're not really crying out to God. They just kind of got used to it. And it's 40 years. A lot of water goes under the bridge in 40 years. You don't even realize how many things change in 40 years. Reagan was president 40 years ago. I mean, a lot of Bruce Springsteen had the biggest album in the country. Michael Jackson was still huge. It was you don't even realize how many things change. Terms of Endearment won the Oscar that year. It's a really sad movie if you've ever seen Terms. But it's long by life. You haven't even seen it, so you hadn't even heard of it because it's 40 years ago. And for 40 years they were enslaved. And so an angel appears, say, okay, God is going to free you from this. And it really seems like it's totally from God's mercy. They're not asking for God to help. It's just God showing grace to his people. And you're going to have a son, and he's going to be something. But you've got to do some special things for him because he's going to be a Nazirite from birth. And she might not have known what a Nazirite was, and you might not know what a Nazirite was. So I'll just tell you, it mentions it in the Numbers there. A Nazirite was a special vow you could take to God. And everybody, if you're an Israelite, a Jewish person, you've got to maintain some ritual purity. But the Nazirites went much further. A Nazirite was not allowed to be near a dead body. Couldn't go to a funeral, couldn't touch anything dead, couldn't be with bones or any of that kind of stuff. Wasn't allowed to do that. It was forbidden for a Nazirite to do that their whole life, for as long as they had the vow. And like Samson, it's going to be his whole life. And there was 2 or 3 guys like that in the Bible. John the Baptist and Samuel were Nazirites their whole life. And this Samson's going to be that way. He's not allowed to be around dead things. He's not allowed to drink wine, but more than just drinking wine, and it's probably because of the fermenting. It's probably because, again, it dies and the death is the alcohol and all that. So you're not allowed to do that. But not only not allowed to be around wine, he wasn't even allowed to be around grapes, even raisins. Couldn't be around anything like that at all. So no death, no grapes. And he had to let his hair grow. That's the one you'll remember because of how his story ends up. He had to let his hair grow his whole life. Couldn't shave his hair. Had to let it grow his whole life. And I think that's mainly just so you'd see him. You'd see Samson. Oh, there's the Nazirite. And you'd see that he had set himself apart for God. And so she says, okay, I'll do it. And Samson, when he's born, she does do it. She tells him all about what he's got to do. And God blesses him from an early age. Samson is fantastically, amazingly strong, and doesn't look strong necessarily, but is strong, and can just do crazy, powerful feats of strength, which I would imagine growing up gave him quite a bit of street cred amongst people. Probably was the most popular boy in school. Probably. Suffered for no lack of female companionship. Probably his whole life, a lot of things worked out, and maybe even made him a little bit arrogant. And when you read about him, he certainly seems that way as an adult because God gave him the strength, and the strength seems to be kind of unconditional as long as he does the Nazirite things. No grapes, no dead things, no cutting your hair. One day it says Samson's walking through a vineyard and a lion attacks him. A lion jumps out of the vineyard and attacks him, and Samson kills the lion and goes on his way. Later he comes back to the vineyard and the lion's dead, but some bees have put a nest inside the lion. So he reaches his hand in there and gets a little honey out of the dead lion. Now that's a problem, right? Because that's a dead thing. This will be around dead things. And he's in a vineyard, right? Which he's not supposed to be in a vineyard and not supposed to be around grapes. But God still made him strong. He just kept getting away with it. He just kept cheating on this thing, and God just kept blessing him anyway. And probably his most famous story is he kills 600 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Finds a jawbone. And again, that should have eliminated it right there. So as soon as he touched the bone, that should have been the end of it. But God just keeps blessing him. And I don't think he really is even trying to honor God. I mean, if you're walking through a vineyard, I mean, you're not really even trying, right? I think people can do that with their sin. And again, partly blind to what it does to God and partly blind to what it does to them. They just don't see it. They just don't think about it. A couple of weeks from now, I'm going to go to a high school week at Wonder Valley, and I help at the high school week. And sometimes we do, we'll do a class for people about pornography and how accessible that is. And maybe that's not anything on your radar at all, but it's a big deal amongst the teenagers and a big deal amongst people probably all around. It's just so easy to access. You can instantly on your phone find things that you can watch whatever you want. I remember as a kid finding a dirty magazine under somebody's mattress and thinking, what an awesome prize this is. But a kid today, you can find that whenever you want, wherever you want. And so we'll talk about it, that it's a struggle. And people who are wanting to get serious with and sometimes faculty will admit, it's a struggle for me too. I really have a hard time, and we're trying to get through this thing. And so somebody will come to me and they'll say, I'm really struggling with it. And I'll say, well, when does it get you? Well, it's my phone. I'll look at my phone and I'll see stuff that I shouldn't see. And I'll say, okay, where do you carry your phone? They'll say, it's in my pocket. And I'll say, well, you're not really struggling at all then. If you're just carrying it around with you, it's like Samson walking through the vineyard. I mean, you're not really even trying. I mean, if you had a phone and that was your problem, but you keep the phone in your drawer during the day, or you keep it in your glove compartment, or you make sure a friend is with you whenever you get it out, well, then I would say, okay, well, there you go. You're struggling, but you're not really struggling. You've not made any steps to really get away from your sin. It'd be like a person saying they wanted to quit drinking, but they're at Shorty's every night, or it's just, if you really wanted to get past this thing, you'd make some adjustments. And if you don't make the adjustments, then you don't really want to get past it, right? And that's where Samson's at. God has told him that you need to do certain things, but he's just not doing it. And God keeps blessing him. It's the craziest thing. And I think eventually Samson comes to believe about himself and about God that it doesn't really matter. That he can do whatever he wants and that God's going to keep pouring it on because that's what God does. And maybe Samson starts to believe about himself that he's just such a great guy that he's got something figured out nobody else has. Well, eventually, at the end of his life, he meets this woman, Delilah. And that's a name you've heard, and if you've heard that story at all. And Samson sees Delilah, and immediately sparks are flying. But Delilah's not, she's a problem. She's kind of up to no good. And the Philistine leaders come to her, and they say, you got to figure out the secret. Why Samson's so strong and tell. It's not just weightlifting, they said. It's not like he just exercises, he eats oats. That's not it. There's something else going on, and you got to tell us what it is. And so she starts kind of asking him questions. Hey, Samson, what makes you so strong? And at first he says, well, it's bowstrings. You tie me up with bowstrings, and I'd be weak as anybody else. And so he falls asleep, and he wakes up, and he's tied up in bowstrings. Snaps them all off. Hey, what's going on? Oh, nothing, she says. Really? What makes you so strong? New ropes. If I was tied up with new ropes, that's a problem. Oh, okay, go to sleep. And then he goes to sleep, wakes up, he's tied up with new ropes. Hey, wait a minute, he says. What's going on? And this goes on 2, 3, or 4 times. He'll tell her what it is, and she immediately does it. And then he just wears him out. Keeps asking, don't you love me? You say you love me, but you won't tell me. Please tell me. And so finally he tells her, it's my hair. You cut my hair, and I'd lose all my strength. I'm a Nazirite, and God asked me to avoid certain things and not to do certain things. I've never cut my hair. If you cut my hair, I'd be... And he's got to know, right? Every time he falls asleep in this woman's house, something happens, And so I'd be watching her every minute. I wouldn't let myself sleep for anything. And she's trying to get him to sleep, serving him turkey and warm milk and stuff. And so he falls asleep. And she brings somebody in to shave his head. And he wakes up bald. And he says, okay, I'm going to go out and whip them all like I do. And there's this verse. And it's kind of a haunting verse. It says, the Lord had left him, but he didn't know it. Now, all through Samson's life, his eyes get him in trouble. He'll see a woman and want her. And in fact, it uses that language. He wants to marry a woman. I saw her. She looks good to me. And he sees. His eyes keep getting him. He'll see something and want it. And he'll see something and get mad. And now he wakes up and he can't see that God's moved on. He just can't see it. He's blind to it. He's lived so far away from God that he's not even aware anymore when God's there and when God's not. He just can't see it anymore. And kind of ironically, the Philistines, when they capture him, the first thing they do is they put out his eyes. Then he really is blind. But he's been blind for years. He just didn't know he was. And I read that story, and especially that last line, that the Lord had left him, and he didn't know it. And it was one of those lines that really hit me. I've been waiting for a chance to talk about it, and today came up. I think that's an important idea. Is that possible? Could that happen to me? Now, on the one hand, we're saved by grace for sure, and it's not my works that get me in there. It's not. But I read Samson's story, and I see how arrogant he got with God. And eventually, he's not even really wanting God's grace. In fact, probably doesn't even think he needs God's grace. And could I walk away like that? And I thought about this idea of being blind. I might not even know I was doing it, right? I might not even be able to see it. And I'd be walking away from God and not even know that I was walking away from God. So I started thinking about it. I mean, I thought about how when I first became a Christian, I asked somebody, well, what do I got to do, as a Christian? How do I do a Christian thing? And they said, I don't know. You need to pray, read your Bible, go to church, get involved. And I did, right? I did. I wasn't good at praying. It was hard for me, but I prayed and I tried to read my Bible and I got in church and now all these years later, I mean, am I still hungry for those things? Do I find that I miss a day or two, or more than a day or two? Do I feel like and do I feel bad about that? I mean, as a Christian, I don't, at this point, I don't really need to do that like I did. I mean, I know, and sure, I'm pretty active in church, but they're paying me, You might be more active too if they was paying you to do it, and so maybe even on that, I'm feeling some pride, and I think it can hit ministers worse than most people. Because, I mean, you can point to things. Remember the prodigal son story? We talked about it a few weeks ago. The younger son takes the father's money and he goes out and spends it and wastes it all. And he comes back and he's just so broken. I'll be your slave. And the father won't hear it. He hugs the son. No, you're my son. And has a big party. And the older son comes in to the house that night. And he sees the party. Hey, what's going on? Well, your brother came back. Isn't that great? And he doesn't think it's great. He's real mad about it. And he's mad about the party. How's this fair? And so the father goes out and talks to the older son. And it had to be real embarrassing to the father to leave the party and go out and beg his older son to come in. And he goes out, and the older son talks real disrespectful to him. This son of yours, he's no brother of mine, and I've been slaving for you for years. And you get the sense that the older son doesn't really love the father either. He doesn't have a good relationship there with dad either, but he justifies it because at least I'm not like that. I'm not the greatest dude in the world, but at least I'm not like that. And I think about me at that wedding, right? Well, at least I'm not like that. I don't do that. I don't do that other stuff. I may be a mess, but I'm not that kind of mess. And by having the prodigal, it kind of gives you an excuse to be who you are. It's the goofiest, stupidest thing in the world. And you can be blind to the whole deal. And I think, well, do I do that? I remember talking a long time, I've told you this before, but talking a long time ago to a couple who was having trouble in their marriage, and the husband says, I'll tell you what the problem is right now. And he jumps right in. I'll tell you what the problem is right now. He said, the problem is she nags me all the time. She's just constantly complaining. And she fires right back. So I wouldn't complain maybe if you'd do something around here. And he says, do something around here. I work like 60 hours a week. I deserve a little rest when I get home, after. And what was interesting about the whole, and they did that for a long time, back and forth, back and forth. But what was interesting with the whole thing is that they weren't really arguing. Like in an argument, you're trying to get to the truth, and they're not really trying to get to the truth. They're like if I saw you on the street, and I said, like you're sitting on the street and we're walking, and I say, you complain all the time. That's the first thing I said. You would say, I do not. That's what you'd say. If you said anything, you might just walk off mad. But if you said something, I do not. Right? But she can't say she doesn't because she knows that she does. So she doesn't look for truth. She just looks for justification. So she fires right back. Well, maybe I wouldn't complain if you'd do something around here. And he feels like he does quite a bit, but he can't think of anything in that moment that he does around the house. So rather than just admit you're right, he again has to look for some justification. And they're both blind. I've had to talk, and you guys have too. I mean, it's not just something a minister deals with. Talk to people who have went through a divorce, and sometimes they'll say, I never saw it coming. I thought we were okay. And so you'll ask a question or two. Well, tell me about it. And they'll start telling you some things. Well, gotta be honest, that sounds like a problem. Well, yeah, I mean, we had some problems like couples, have problems, but nothing too bad. And then they start talking, and some of it sounds pretty bad. I mean, didn't you see that and think, man, you need to fix that? Didn't you think that was a problem? No, I guess I never really saw it. It's just the craziest thing. I just never really saw it. I just didn't notice, I guess. And that's how sin works. And if you don't watch out, just like Samson, you can get to a place where you don't even know that God's really moved on. And you and God don't really have a relationship at all. You thought you did because you made a decision a long time ago, but it's been years and years since you did anything about that. I think about when I first became a Christian, and I would think about the sinful stuff that I did, and I would just feel such a weight. I mean, God, forgive me for this, and I'll never do it again. And I knew I would do it again, but I would hope I wouldn't. I would hope that I just feel so awful about it. But after you've been Christian for a while, you can get to where it doesn't really bother you as much. And you're not really trying to get rid of the sin. You're just looking for justification. I learned a phrase a long time ago. You start doing sin management. I don't really get rid of it. I just manage it. Like phone thing again. Like if you're looking at stuff on your phone you shouldn't look at. I mean, if my motive in being a Christian is I just want to love God, and I want to be close to God, and I want God's Spirit in my heart, and I want to be red hot on fire for Him. If that's my motive, then that should offend me, right? But if my motive is I just don't want to get caught, well, then I learn how to look when no one's around. I learned how to hide it. Learn how to clear all my search histories so no one will ever catch me. If my motive is just to not get caught. And the weird part about that is God sees you in the vineyard. And He sees you around the dead things. And if you're caught, I mean, you just are caught. God sees all of it. And just because I'm fooling the people around me doesn't mean I'm fooling Him. And could I ever get to a place where the Lord had sort of moved on and I just didn't even know it? And I got to confess, I was haunted by that. It really made me think. And like I said, I think ministers can get hit with this harder than most people because again, I mean, I'm paid to be Christian. And that sounds like an awful thing, but it kind of is the truth. I'm paid to act a certain way and do certain things and be a certain kind of person. And I can look at all those things and say, well, look at all the things I'm doing. At least I'm not like whoever else. But that doesn't mean my heart's in it. And so I'm just presenting that to you today. I know some of you have not been Christian very long. And everything I talked about at the beginning, you're right in the middle of that. And that's such an awesome time. I mean, it really, really, really is. When I help at church camp, and when I've just one or two times I got to do some prison ministry, and you introduce people to it for the first time, or when you're in a ministry where you're really presenting the gospel for the first time to some people and they've never thought about it before, and you're opening eyes, and man, that's such a powerful thing for the Christian. And when you see somebody, the lights come on, right? And for the first time they can see and they understand it, and it's all so vivid and powerful, and oh man, I can't get enough of it. But then the other people in here have been Christian for a while. And maybe you've gotten to the place now where you can sing the songs and it doesn't really, or even the communion, you know. You take the bread and the juice and you don't think any longer about what he did. And about why he did it. Again, when I first became a Christian, I felt the weight of my sin, and I know how much it had to cost, but as I've become a good person, I can start to think that, really I don't have that much sin. He helps me out, but I mean, I'm a pretty big get for God. He knew what he was doing when he brought me in. And nobody thinks that stuff out loud. But they think it. They're just blind to it. So I want to pray with you here at the end of the service. And that's not, like I said, it's been working on me. It may not work on you, and that's okay. Like I said, it's not necessarily something everybody has to deal with. But I want to pray for you. And I want you to really take a hard look at your heart and ask yourself, God, I mean, do I still want these things? I mean, is it still powerful to me, or am I just managing my sin? Am I just making sure I don't get caught? Or I don't do something that's so bad that I slide off into the bad people category? I want to make sure I'm mostly in the good people category. I just want to challenge you to think through that. And if you need someone to pray with you, we'll have some people up in the front, on both sides, and in the back, and be happy to pray with you today about whatever you want to pray about. Maybe about this or something completely different. Let's take advantage of this time. So won't you stand up? I'm going to pray with you right now. Dear Lord God, here we all are, the bunch of us, and we're standing before you. And God, the hard part about spiritual blindness is you don't even know when you're blind. You don't see it. You're not aware of it. And so God, we come to you and we're asking you to search our hearts to see if there's any offensive way in us, God, and help us to see it too. Is there anything, God, that we need to clean? Is there anything in us, God, that we need to straighten up? God, when I think about my relationships with the people who are most precious to me, do I serve them like I should? Do I love them like I should? Do I forgive them like I should? God, do I hold on to grudges and write people off? God, when I think about people who are the hardest for me to get along with, the people who are maybe enemies of mine, am I working to build grace there? Am I working to show compassion there and mercy? God, am I aware that their sin really is not any worse than mine? Have I forgotten that? Have I forgotten about my sin, God, altogether? God, help me as I think about my relationship with you. Do I still hunger to know you better? Do I still hunger, God, to get rid of this dark part of me and draw myself into your light? Do I still want that, God? Help me to, again, be reminded about how much you love us, how much you love me. And help me, God, again, be willing to come back. And I just pray for anybody, God, who's hungry for that. Even if it's just a little. And I pray, God, that you feed that hunger and help draw us close. In Jesus' name, amen.